Hello dear friends, we're going to start another conversation today. I'm Father Anthony and this is my son Michael. Hello Michael. We are going to talk about today again New Testament readings that are assigned for that day and a saint who is assigned to the day. Like we said last time, the Church very wisely has put a reading from the New Testament and a reading from the Old Testament actually also, and a saint in the same day, so that we can read the New Testament reading, we can learn the lesson, and then we have a good example from life, so that the teaching that is in the Bible is actually possible to make into a life, so that we have an example that shows us how we can do things. So yesterday we celebrated the feast day of Saint John Chrysostom, and 2 days ago we celebrated the feast day of Saint Nectarios of Pentapolis. These are two great hierarchs, Saint Nectarios and Saint John Chrysostom, who have lived long apart from each other. Saint John Chrysostom lived in the 4th century and Saint Nectarios lived in the 20th century. He was alive when maybe some of our grandparents were alive. And these are two great hierarchs. And the reading for that day, yesterday, and for the Saint Nectarios' day was the reading for the hierarchs that is designated in the Bible, that is put on the altar of the church. So the reading tells us about the Good Shepherd. Now we know that Jesus used many examples from daily life, from nature, from relationship between people, different categories of people. And by those examples, he tried to teach what the truth is about the kingdom of God, about our relationship with God. So in this story, Jesus talks about Good Shepherd. And he describes who the Good Shepherd is. He kind of takes this metaphor of a shepherd and a flock and describes God's relationship with us. This may sound a little bit strange in the 21st century, but having been growing up in a village, having seen the relationship between shepherd and his flock, how much care a shepherd puts to take care of his flock, how fragile every animal in a flock can be, I can visualize and imagine why Jesus used that. Another example that Jesus used for his relationship or God's relationship with us is an image of a mother chick. A mother chick protecting her own chicks. If you have seen a mother chick in a farm, at night and sometimes during the day, the mother chick opens her wings and all the little chickens go underneath, and then the mother chicken warms them up, comforts them. And so Jesus uses this example and shows us that we are like those little chicks and we need a comfort, and the comfort comes from God. And the same way Jesus in the story of the Good Shepherd shows different kinds of relationships. He uses a metaphor of a thief. He uses a metaphor of a hireling, a person who is hired to take care of the sheep. And then he uses the example of the Good Shepherd. So I'm going to go through all these three aspects of relationships and show what is the difference between those three. So in the morning reading, in the morning service, we read one segment of the New Testament where Jesus talks about a thief coming into the barn. He says, the good shepherd comes through the door because he probably has the keys and he's not afraid of the guards. He's not afraid of the dogs that are protecting the barn. And he freely, openly enters into the barn. And the sheep recognize him or his voice. But the thief comes through the window. And the thief is there to steal the sheep rather than to take care of them. But the good shepherd comes and takes care of them, gives them care, takes them to the great green pastures. And in the Psalms, we have a beautiful prayer where we describe God as a shepherd who takes us to the green pastures, who takes us to the cold spring, and we quench our thirst. And these are all metaphors. It just shows the relationship. In the second story that Jesus tells us about Good Shepherd and his sheep, he says, the hireling does not care about the sheep. The hireling takes care of the sheep until the danger arises. When the wolves come, the hireling runs away, and the wolves devour, destroy the herd, destroy the flock, and they eat the sheep, and the hireling is gone. And very importantly, Jesus says, and the good shepherd puts down his life for his sheep. So here we are talking about extreme love. We're talking about self-sacrificial love that the shepherd has for his flock. He is ready to put down his life. In another metaphor that I have heard about God's relationship with us, sometimes we call God king or a prince. And sometimes we don't understand what exactly the relationship should be between a king and his people. When we say king, automatically we understand or assume or imagine taxes. But in reality, a good king is a blessing for people. And in one metaphor that I have heard about the relationship between king and his people is that the good king goes in front of the army when a danger arises. When there is a war, the king is the leader of the people. And he's on the front line, fighting against the enemy and protecting his people. And if one has to die, the first one is the king who dies for his own people. And the king is the only person who can lay his life for the entire nation, entire people. The soldiers lay their lives too, but in some respect, each soldier gives his life for his own family, for his own town, for his own village. The king is responsible for the whole country. This metaphor shows us that God is in charge, or God is in care of the whole entire humanity. And the whole humanity is his creation, and he is the caretaker of humanity. He's their king, he's their prince. And in this story that I told you, he is the good shepherd. And how is Jesus the good shepherd? In another story that Jesus uses a metaphor of a sheep and a shepherd, he says that the good shepherd leaves the 99 sheep if he has 100, and he goes after the one lost sheep. And he finds him, he rescues him, or her in this case, and puts her on his shoulders and brings him back and returns him to the barn or to his friends or her friends. In this process, the shepherd also endangers his life. Because if you probably have seen in some children's Bibles, the rescuing part of the sheep is kind of dangerous, because usually it depicts, and it is in reality true, when the sheep get stuck, they get stuck usually in very dangerous places. They get stuck between thorns, or they get stuck on the edge of the cliff, or they go on a very narrow path. It's so narrow at the edge of the cliff that they cannot turn around and come back. So it requires undertaking of a lot of responsibility. And the rescuing part is full of danger. If the shepherd is not very careful when he's rescuing the sheep, he may slip and fall off the cliff. But even in those circumstances, the good shepherd, the loving shepherd, is ready to go and do what is necessary for the rescuing of the sheep. We also already said in the last conversation that Jesus came to rescue us. We were separated from God, and that separation could only be overcome by God reaching out to us. Like we said, the humanity has innate need for God. And no matter where we are, in what circumstances we are, we always have that yearning need for God. And people have tried to find, they have, as we said in our previous conversations, they have tried to find God. They have named many things as God. And at the end, they have come short to finding God. And the only way that God could be found, the only way we could be found, was through Christ's coming to us, God becoming human. And many people cannot understand or imagine, how can God become human? It is an act of supreme love, an act of sacrificial love, like the good shepherd. Is it worth it to danger your own life to go and rescue a sheep? So what if you have 99 sheep instead of 100 now? But the metaphor shows that the sheep is very important for the shepherd. That's why Jesus came, God became human, became one of us, came into the danger zone of the separation from God. As you remember, on the cross, Jesus cries out and says, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" So Jesus goes as far, becoming like one of us, as it requires, up to the point where he feels separated from the Father, the way we were separated from the Father. But being God, he takes us and he returns us to the barn, to the heavenly kingdom. That's a metaphor. The barn is a beautiful metaphor for the heavenly kingdom. We return to our friends, to our brothers and sisters who are already there. We join the angelic hosts to glorify God. And now in that story, Jesus tells us that there are others who will come. And he says, whoever came before me and claimed that he is going to rescue was a thief. And there are others who are hirelings. There are others who come to be paid for what they are doing, and when the danger arises, they escape. They leave the herd, they leave the flock to the devouring wolves, and the flock gets hurt. In this situation also, a lot of courage is required when the shepherd is in the woods and the wolves attack. Even sometimes the dogs run away, because the wolves are really strong, very dangerous, and they can hurt the dogs, they can hurt the shepherd, they can hurt the flock eventually. But the good shepherd stands up and fights, stands up and supports and protects his flock. So this is another image that Jesus uses for his relationship with us. He never will leave us in danger. If we feel that we are in danger, all we need to do is call his name. And in this same story, he says that the shepherd knows his sheep by name. And the sheep recognize his voice. And he calls them, and when he calls them, they come. And having been a shepherd myself when I was young, 15, 20 years old, I know that when you call your sheep, they really come to you. And when they are in danger, they start making noises. They call the shepherd. And the shepherd runs and rescues them. In this beautiful story, Jesus gives a beautiful example of shepherd, various conditions of our life where we can be in danger, where we can be in care of a hireling, or we can be attacked by wolves.
Who are the hirelings?
Jesus says that the hirelings are the ones who don't care much about the sheep.
So bad priests, essentially.
Well, that's one good example. Jesus assigned his disciples to take care of his flock. Now, in this story, he also says something very important at the end of the story. He says to his disciples, essentially he was talking to the Jews and his disciples, saying that Jews are his main concentration. The Israelites, the Hebrews, are his main flock. But then at the end of the story he says, I have other sheep outside of the barn that I need to rescue. And he means the Gentiles and the pagans and other nations living outside of Israel. And what he does at the end of his life, he sends his disciples to herd or to bring other people to his relationship. So in this story where Jesus talks about the shepherd, he is the ultimate shepherd. St. Paul says that he is the shepherd. But then he also assigns other people to take care of his people, other individuals, persons, like his disciples. And from his disciples, it went to their students, their disciples, and so it went down from Jesus to us. And in this relationship, we can become a hireling. We can be a person who comes for his own needs rather than for the needs of the people. And so he warns us about it. And in the story of John Chrysostom and in the story of Saint Nectarios, we can see a beautiful example of a good shepherd. They both, those two saints, went through a lot of struggle, a lot of suffering, even by the hands of their fellow brothers. So usually in the early lives of the saints, or in the early centuries of Christianity, Christians were suffering from the hands of the pagans, or of the kings who did not accept Christianity. But in these two stories of St. John Chrysostom and of St. Nectarios of Pentapolis, we see that they are suffering from their fellow brothers. And to answer your question from that perspective, if we look at St. John Chrysostom and St. Nectarios as good shepherds, the ones who are persecuting them are the hirelings, because they are fighting against the good shepherds. And in the story of St. John Chrysostom, there is one very beautiful part where the story says that when he was exiled by the request of his brothers, other priests and bishops, into a far country, his people stand up and go to the palace and request from the queen to bring him back. But that doesn't end, and he gets exiled again second time, and he actually dies in exile. But another beautiful thing that happens is when they bring his body back after he dies. People come out and pay their deepest respects for his burial. And they put him in the church before his funeral. A voice comes from the altar of the Good Shepherd and says, "Peace be to you all." And in this beautiful image, in this beautiful story, we see that the Good Shepherd remains a Good Shepherd even after he dies. And St. John Chrysostom is the example of that Good Shepherd that has been assigned by Jesus. Because when he went up to the Father, back into the heaven, he assigned his disciples to take care of the people whom he had called.
Who was Saint Nectarios?
Saint Nectarios is another bishop who was a very, very holy man, and he lived many years, and he was assigned to many churches to be a bishop of those churches. And eventually he was assigned to an island to be a bishop of a convent. He was very old at that time, and he lived in peace and very prayerful life with the nuns that lived on that island. There are beautiful stories about him, how people, even during his life, would travel and go to him for healing. They would ask his prayers to be healed. And the most beautiful story that I have heard about him, which actually describing how he died, he was at the hospital, and when he died, the doctor or the nurse came and took his clothes off, and she or he put the clothes on the bed next to him. And there was a paralytic or a sick person on that bed. And just because his clothes touched that person, he was healed. And he stood up, and the doctor witnessed about it, that this miracle happened after Saint Nectarios died. I would recommend you to go find his life and read the life. It's a beautiful story. It's very long to be, I wouldn't be able to tell all the beautiful stories about him, but he's one of the hierarchs, one of the bishops who lived in the 20th century. Many miracles happened during his life and after his life. And it is known that today people take oil that is burning in front of his icon, and that oil has healing power. And that is actually one of the signs that a person is a saint, that that person is united with God. And the healing comes from God. We need to clearly state that, because saints can become also idols for us. It is not that person that is giving us the healing. It is God that gives healing through that person. Because being a saint, becoming a saint, means to be united with God, to be in the barn of the Good Shepherd. And once when you are there, you are warm and you are fed and you are healthy, then you can take care of the others. And in this case, when we talk about the saints, when the saint is in relationship with God, when he prays to God, God hears his prayers and fulfills his request. In the example of Saint Nectarios, we can see that even material things change. And we can see this example from the story of the woman who touches Jesus' garments, Jesus' clothes. She doesn't ask him to heal her. She doesn't even touch him directly, but she touches his clothes. And because Jesus was radiating with healing and love and holiness, that holiness heals everybody who comes in contact with it. And the saints, the holy people, being in a relationship with God, radiate with the same love that God radiates. And that healing power coming from God through the saints come to us. And those are the good shepherds who take care of the sick ones, who take care of the ones who are in danger, who take care of the ones like poor Lazarus. They feed the poor, they heal the sick, they nurture the ones who need support and help. So today's story was about the Good Shepherd, and the Good Shepherd is ultimately Jesus. The Good Shepherd is ultimately God. And because of Michael's good question, we also clarified that Jesus assigned other people to take care of the other sheep that he has. The other sheep have to come back to the barn also. They need to be rescued. And there are many, many people who go astray. They get distracted from God's love, and they go their own way, and they get lost. And they start suffering at the end of their lives or during their lives. Even young children sometimes do things that their friends suggest without knowing how dangerous it could be, and children go astray and they do things that affect their lives from that moment on. And it will require a lot of work. Like for the Good Shepherd goes and rescues the sheep at the edge of the cliff, people can do the same thing. They can go in their lives in an astray path. They can go into a dangerous path to the edge of the cliff. They can even fall off the cliff and die. And Jesus speaks about people who he calls dead, even though they were alive. They were living, they were walking around, and he tells to his disciples, let the dead people bury their own dead. And he talks about those people who have gone astray. They have gone to the edge of the cliff. They haven't called for help. Sometimes a sheep can be stubborn too. That's another characteristic of a sheep. They can be really quiet when they are in danger. And no matter how much the shepherd looks for them, you cannot find them. To make a conclusion for today's conversation, today's story, is that we need to be careful, we need to be attentive, and we need to be always in connection with Christ, with our Lord, and that happens through relationships with other people. So, like Michael's question was a very good question, anybody can be that good shepherd who is assigned by Jesus to help others. So then, when we are in danger, when we know that we are kind of lost, we are separated from the rest of our friends, or from the good path we have deviated, we're going the wrong direction, we need to start looking for that good person. And through that good person, we'll communicate, connect with God, and find the way back, the way to salvation. Thank you, Michael, for coming today. It was a wonderful day today,
Thank
a
you.
wonderful conversation. Thank you, and have a good day.